Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een amma ba'd. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that a believer is ليس المؤمن بالطعان ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذي. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said all of these things together. He said that a believer should not be vulgar, rude, and anything to do with that. A person should not be somebody who curses others, ta'an, cursing others constantly. Ta'an does it often, and that obviously takes into the understanding that a person might sometimes do it. But ta'an, all of these that are being used here, ta'an, la'an, la'an means to curse someone, ta'an means to accuse somebody or say something bad about somebody. So all of these things, it's talking about somebody who's constantly doing this. When somebody constantly does something like that, it becomes a habit. It's being done out of habit. It's a way of them satisfying themselves. So this is a short thing that I want to mention about quickly. If we look at the reality of our lives, every one of us has probably something to complain about, because this world is never going to be 100% perfect. That's the description of paradise, 100% perfect. Perfection is only in paradise. However, in this world, you can make everything a path to paradise and something that a person doesn't have to complain about. So, for example, in this world, when we speak about our realities, and sometimes in our realities we've got issues. So some people might be in a situation where they just don't like the job that they do, or they've got a very, very, very difficult child, or they got a very, very difficult father or a mother or a brother or sister or somebody or a co-worker or whatever that may be, and they don't find a way to get out of that situation. So for example, a person contacted me the other day saying that what's the problem, or how bad is it for me to stop speaking to somebody? I said, you see, this is where a lot of people misunderstand something. People aren't required to speak for hours with others and hold big discussions with them if they find that they're having problems with these people. What is necessary though is that you don't break yourself off completely, that you start avoiding each other and not talking at all. One is that you can just give a salam and how are you and then move on. You're not required to sit and talk to somebody. But this person kept asking me for the ruling about that. And then I said, look, can you give me the situation? Because it's, to give a ruling, can I just stop talking to somebody? Will it be haram? It's very difficult, because there are certain cases in which that is allowed. Then eventually he told me that when I go to work, there's a person who's constantly bothering me. There's a person who just constantly bothers me. So I said, well, if it works, you just say salam and carry on, because he'll still come and speak to me. He'll still come and start saying things to me. I said, then you need to file a complaint against this person, take some measures like that. It's not as simple as not speaking to somebody or not, because you're saying that even if they don't speak to you, even if you don't speak to them, they're still going to come and bother you. Now, moving away from that situation, a lot of the situation that many of the women find themselves in is a situation where it's a bad situation at home. Generally to do with in-laws or something of that nature or the other, or to do with the husband. And I just want to try to get some sensible understanding to this, which will be inshallah helpful to all, because a lifetime full of complaints, many women have gone through that, and literally it's just made them miserable, and it's ended their life in no form of happiness in this world. And the problem is that a person who's just used to complaining shouldn't think that there's going to be better to come afterwards, because complaining is not what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wants us to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to deal with our situations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to deal with our situations, whatever those situations are. And there are proper ways of dealing with that. The problem that we have, especially if you go back to India, Pakistan and other countries, where there was a tradition of the daughter-in-law coming in and working hard and basically just doing everything to the bidding of the in-laws, and not having her own say whatsoever, and so on and so forth. And this was never a natural situation. This has never been a natural situation. So what's happened is that you've got a history generally, a heritage, a history of many of these situations. So for example, the mother-in-law, she's been similarly treated by her mother-in-law before her, and her mother-in-law was probably similarly treated by her mother-in-law before that. And I don't want to paint a very bleak picture, but it looks like that was the case in a number of cases. So it just carries on. I've witnessed this myself, where the mother complains and the grandmother also complains about her mother-in-law. So now what does a person do in that situation? Complaining just for the sake of consolation doesn't get you anywhere. You'll have to keep doing it. You'll have to tell lots and lots of people. You will pollute the atmosphere. You will just do ghibah. You will give your rewards away to this person, because at the end of the day, it's sinful just to speak to speak the bad about somebody, for no valid reason. It is permissible, of course, to complain to the right individuals if that's the case, or to complain at the right time. It's permissible to say something, that a person is going through, as long as the person does it properly. But every time you've got somebody over, that's all you speak about. I remember one situation where somebody mentioned that his wife was going somewhere, and she's not a complaining person at all. She's a very happy person. However, when there were certain times in the week or whatever, she would come and she'd look gloomy and she'd speak about gloomy things. And later, when they discussed this, it was discovered that it was always when she went to meet another person in their complex who used to be constantly complaining about her situation. So constantly complaining about her situation, that woman was causing this other woman to also get into that mood. Because when you speak about gloomy things, then people think of their own gloom and doom, and they don't think about happy things. They weren't able to help each other in speaking about these gloomy things. The only thing was that the first person felt that this was her way of getting some comfort, but it would happen each time, every time. It'd just be a new saga of the story, the new, installment of EastEnders or Brookside or Neighbours or whatever it is that people watch. And this is essentially the kind of thing that was happening. So that kind of complaint has to be abstained from. If you want to do a constant complaint, you want to really pour out your heart each time, I won't call that a complaint, then you do it in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you may get up for tahajjud prayer, let that drive you, and then you will see that results will happen. If you're just complaining about your situation with your husband or your in-laws or your children or whoever it may be, and it's just a constant theme of complaining about them, then that's not going to help anybody. That's not going to help anybody at all. You'd rather do that complaint in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will see that Allah will answer your prayers, because now you have turned your attention away from people and you've turned it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is very important is that people stop complaining to others thinking that they can help them. Yes, if it is somebody that can help them, somebody influential, somebody who can get involved and speak about it, or who can give good advice, that could be justified. That is completely justified, because as humans, we do seek things from other humans, and we do gain some comfort from other humans as well. But what I'm speaking about particularly is in the situation where a person is just constantly complaining, because it's almost as if that when you go to speak to this person, that is what they're generally going to be speaking about. And you can't do anything for them, they can't do anything for themselves. It's just a point of discussion. And what happens then is that the cursing comes out in that, accusations will come there. There will generally be exaggerations as well, because generally when a person speaks bad about others, they will exaggerate it just to make it sound more dramatic, just to invoke the attention of the other person or their sympathy, and get their emotions going. They will generally exaggerate as well. All of these things are being counted against us. Yes, we may have we may have some trouble in these situations, but it doesn't give us the right to go and exaggerate in these situations. You see, what I've noticed is that the happiest person in this world is the one who looks ahead, who thinks practically, recognizes and acknowledges their reality, asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and tries to focus on the good and move on. Anybody who sits aside and just sulks about things, who cannot deal with these matters, who become just aggravated over small things, who can't deal with realities, or even if they become aggravated for a very long time. There'll be some people who do get aggravated, but they're able to overcome it very quickly. But people who can't overcome it very quickly, or who get aggravated over small things, their whole life is going to be a misery. Or people who cannot deal with these situations, so they have to just become isolated from people. When you become isolated from people, it doesn't necessarily help. We're not saying that go and speak to others about it if you've got a problem, but go and speak different good things about others. Ignore what's happened. These are just realities of life at the end of the day. And I know that somebody who's down in the pit finds it very difficult to do this. But if there's nobody to tell them, then they just stay down in that pit. Get yourself out of that pit. When a person is inside a pit, all they see around them are these dirt walls around them. They're in a pit, all they see is soil around them, dirt, and all the creepy crawlies. It's not nice being in a pit. Let's put it that way, right? That's like being in your grave. But when you do come out and you climb out above the rim, all sides, the land stretches on forever. So take that metaphor, take that example, that get out of your situation. The pit is going to stay the same, but if you keep yourself in the pit, it's going to be the same. When you get out of that situation, you will see that there's many opportunities out there. Get yourself engaged in something, do something. It will help. It might not solve the situation completely, but it will definitely make it better to deal with, because your mind will be preoccupied with something else. Now, two harms, generally speaking, when it comes to these situations, is that, one which I mentioned before, is that it pollutes the atmosphere. A person who starts complaining about their in-laws 24/7, or who complains about the husband 24/7, they're doing a number of other things. There's a lot of collateral damage. It may make the person feel good about themselves. It may make the person feel that I'm getting something out of my system and all the rest of it. But the amount of collateral damage is way more harmful than that. Because generally speaking, there's a lot of children involved in this case. So for example, if I'm going to start complaining about my mother-in-law, and I don't have any complaints about her, may Allah reward her abundantly. Inshallah, she's going to Jannah. Right? That's my dua. May Allah really reward her. But if I start complaining about her, and if I've got some issues with her, right, then what I'm going to be complaining about essentially in front of my children eventually is going to be their grandmother. So now what I'm doing is, that mother-in-law of mine may be perfect with my grandchildren, but not with me. She may have issues with me, but with the grandchildren, she loves them to death and she's very good for them. And you have to remember, children need their grandparents. That is like a second set of parents that they have, and is very important for a healthy relationship, healthy upbringing, healthy tarbiyah, healthy, really good environment. That is really, really beneficial. But what I'm going to do is, I'm trying to now pollute them. Because I don't like them, I want everybody else to hate them. Or even if I don't want to do that, genuinely, by me speaking constantly evil about this, it's going to make them feel bad about them. They're going to see two sides to their grandmother. They're going to feel she's a hypocrite. She's very nice with me, but look how she is with my mother. Because at the end of the day, people like their mother. They generally have some affinity to their mother. And anybody, especially if your parents tell you something, you really take it to heart. And especially when there's contradictions there, that makes it very difficult for a person to survive. Psychologically, it's very difficult for a person to see contradictions in their parents. Their parents are telling them to do something, but they don't do something, right? They don't do something, or they're saying something different about somebody. It's a massive contradiction. So you not only are you you don't think that you're just getting some comfort by voicing your issues about, each time in front of your children, but what you're doing is you're speaking about their grandparent. Right? And likewise, if it's about your husband, and the reason I keep going on about husbands here is because I'm speaking to a group of women, so I would tell the men something different. But when it comes to that, if you've got a problem with your husband, you're constantly speaking about it. So for example, if he's coming late one day or something, so you tell your children, look, he's always late, man. How can you trust him? It seems like a casual statement to make by a wife about her husband. How can you trust him? Look at that. He's always saying that. What does that tell the children? Don't trust your father. He's never going to be on time for you. Now, even if that's the case, do you have to make them, do you have to lose, to take away their hope? Right? Or things like that. Your father doesn't buy us anything. He's always out with his friends. He may be, and that might be a reality. And I can understand in that situation, you may want to complain. But it's just about trying to deal with that situation. So complaints only when necessary, and only to those who it might help. If you want to do it to feel good, then complain in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's when something's going to happen. That's where you're going to get something out of it. So that's my conclusion for this really small talk today. But basically, if you want to complain, you really have to complain, then complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Complain, speak nicely to somebody who you think can help, who has some power, who has some influence, who may be able to give you some good advice. Otherwise, every time your friends are there, you will be speaking about it. They will then start speaking about their in-laws or their husbands or whatever it is. And that's a massive problem. Complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is when you're going to see the fruits of your complaints really come about. And that is really helpful, because it helps you to really connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe Allah has given you this to make you connect with Him, and you're still keeping the veil up. So this is something to think about. Never allow ourselves to come into the situation where we become constant cursers, complainers, tormentors, slanderers, people who backbite others constantly. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from this. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.